Dust rose like old sorrow from the trampled ground, curling in the early morning sun as if even the earth didn't want to see what was happening on that wooden platform. She couldn't have been more than 12. Bones too small for her age, skin brown from too much sun and too little care, and eyes, those eyes didn't blink much. They stayed fixed on the horizon, just past the line of faces watching her. In her arms, swaddled in a fraying blanket made from flour sackcloth, lay a baby boy. Newborn. His head no bigger than her palm. His breast shallow, but steady. One of his tiny fists had found her collar and held tight. The auctioneer was sweating. His voice was sharp, worn thin from selling off all manner of things: pigs, plows, whiskey barrels. But this wasn't like the others, and he knew it. Folks didn't bid loud. Most just stared, unsure if this was misfortune or a miracle they were witnessing. The girl didn't cry. She hadn't since the river took her mother and fever took her father. What was left of her blood had turned hard after that. And now, it was her step-uncle who dragged her here, muttering all the while about mouths he didn't feed and burdens he didn't choose. She'd begged, just once, quiet-like, not for herself but for the baby. Said she'd work till her hands bled if he'd just let her stay. He'd laughed and slapped her so hard her ear rang for a day. The baby stirred, a small whimper. She adjusted her grip, rocked gently. "Hush now," she whispered, so low it didn't break the air. "I won't let 'em take you." Men in dusters and broad hats muttered to each other, eyeing her not like a girl but like something curious and troublesome. Some nudged their friends and laughed without smiling. One man with silver teeth barked out, "I'll take her. Might be she's worth something once she fills out." The laughter that followed came sharp and ugly. She didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just shifted the baby higher, pressing him close to where her heart still beat. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "She comes with the infant. Both healthy, best we can tell. Starting bid, $10. Silence. Then a creak of leather as the silver-toothed man lifted his hand again. 10. Hell, I'll take both. Girl can clean, baby can be sold off somewhere. Win-win. The crowd murmured. A few turned away. One woman pulled her shawl tighter and shook her head. But no one stopped it. The girl didn't look at the man. She stared at the baby's face. She kissed the crown of his head once, slow and steady. Maybe she'd get one more day with him. Maybe not. But if this was the end of them, she'd make sure he felt love one last time. She took one step off the platform. And that's when it happened. A voice, low, rough, not loud but solid, cut through the wind like a knife through rope. "I'll double it." The girl froze. Her ears tried to believe what they'd heard, but her heart didn't dare hope. From the edge of the crowd, a figure stepped forward. Broad-shouldered. Long coat. Dust-covered boots and a hat that had seen better days. He moved like someone who didn't rush for anything anymore. Mid-40s, maybe older. He didn't look at the girl. Not yet. His eyes were on the auctioneer. 20, he said again, slower this time. The auctioneer blinked. "Sir, I ain't bartering," the man said. "I'm buying." The silver-toothed man laughed. "You gonna raise a kid now, old man? That girl's not worth the feed." The quiet man turned toward him, gaze steady. "Didn't ask your thinking?" Another murmur ran through the crowd, but no one else bid. The auctioneer, relieved, nodded fast. "Sold. $20. To Mr. Everett Nash." That was the first time the girl looked at him. Her eyes, still wide, still watching for danger, met his. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a kind word or a false promise. But his look said something else. It said safe. He walked up the platform, slow as ever, like the world would wait for him no matter what. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. Just stood there and tipped his hat slightly. "You ride?" he asked, not unkind. She nodded once. "I got a wagon." She followed him down without a word. The crowd parted. The silver-toothed man spat and stormed off. No one watched him go. They reached a weather-beaten wagon tied to two quiet horses. He helped her up with a hand on her elbow, nothing more. She sat on the bench with the baby still cradled. The man climbed up beside her, took the reins. The road stretched out like a ribbon tied to nowhere. Dry hills and rust-colored skies. But she sat taller now. The baby nestled deep in the hollow of her chest. She didn't know this man. Didn't even know where they were headed. But something deep inside, something quiet, said the worst part was over. After a long while, he spoke again. "What's his name?" She hesitated. "Ain't given one yet." He nodded like that made sense. "Sometimes takes a little livin' first," he said, guiding the wagon forward. She turned her head, just enough to study his weathered face. "What's yours?" he answered without looking at her. "Everett." She whispered hers, too soft to echo. Then looked back at the baby. They didn't talk much after that. The wind spoke enough. And somewhere between the town fading behind them and the road folding open ahead, she finally let her breath come all the way out. It wasn't rescue. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it wasn't the end either. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The wagon creaked beneath them as it rolled through endless plains, the sun dipping behind the hills like a slow goodbye. The girl sat rigid, arms wrapped around the baby swaddled close to her ribs, his soft breaths making little clouds in the cooling air. Everett held the reins loose, letting the horses set the pace, as if even they knew not to rush a thing that had just been broken open. They didn't speak much on the ride. There was something respectful in the silence, not cold, just careful. Like trying not to startle a bird too early in the morning. By the time the ranch came into view, night had spread like ink across the prairie. The house was small, all slanted wood and nail heads rusting from too many storms. But the windows flickered gold with lamplight. A faint curl of smoke puffed from the chimney like the house was breathing. Waiting. Everett climbed down first, tied the reins. Held out a steady hand. She stared at it for a moment, then took it. Not because she trusted him. But because the baby was heavy, and she was tired, and for the first time, no one was pulling her. Inside smelled of pine ash and old leather. A low fire whispered in the hearth. She hovered near the door, arms tightening as Everett moved about the space, setting his hat on a peg, lighting a second lamp. He didn't look at her, not directly. Just nodded toward the cot by the fireplace, laid out with a folded quilt. "You can take that. It's warmer close to the stone. Baby too," he said. She lowered herself slow, like the cot might vanish if she leaned too hard. The baby stirred. She rocked him without thinking, her thumb rubbing the edge of his cheek until he settled. Everett poured water from a kettle into a dented tin cup and set it near her elbow. "Milk in the morning," he muttered. "Goat's good. He'll take it." He didn't offer more. Didn't ask questions. Just moved toward the back room, boots heavy, door creaking closed behind him. She stayed awake for hours, watching the fire dance. Listening for danger that never came. The baby curled tighter to her chest, and finally, she let sleep take her like a tide rolling over shore. Morning came with the cries of roosters and the ache of having survived another day. He was already outside, his shape moving slow between the barn and the coop. She watched from the window, unsure if she should do something, help, leave, say thank you. She didn't do any of those. Just fed the baby, then sat by the window holding him, waiting for something to make sense. When Everett returned, he brought with him a chipped mug of goat's milk, warm and steaming, and a tin spoon. "You'll want to mix it with water," he said. "Too rich for his belly straight." She nodded, then asked, eyes downcast, "Why'd you take us?" He set the mug down, paused, and looked at her for the first time, properly. There was something unreadable in his face, but it wasn't pity. "I reckon I've known what empty sounds like too long," he said. "Figured I'd rather hear crying than nothing at all." She didn't answer. But when she fed the baby that morning, she didn't look so much like she was preparing him for a world that would never love him. Days passed in soft patterns. She never asked to stay, and he never told her she could. But she swept the floor without being told. Gathered eggs. Watched the goats. kept the baby swaddled and clean. He built a cradle out of scrap wood by the third day. Left it by the fire without a word. She touched it once, fingers gliding along the rough sanded edge. Then she laid the baby inside, and for the first time, he slept through the night. The baby's name was still unsaid between them. She hadn't dared give him one before. Names meant you expected a future. But now, she whispered Ash when she thought no one could hear. Like the trees her mother used to point at on long walks, saying they could grow in fire-touched soil. Ash didn't cry as much anymore. Maybe he sensed something settling too. Everett brought in visitors now and then. Not many. Just two. One was a tall woman with sun-lined eyes and hands that smelled like mint and sage. She was introduced as Mara, Everett's late wife's sister. A midwife, calm as moonlight. She looked at the baby with gentle eyes and said, "He's strong. That's from you." She said it to the girl, not Everett. Then she handed over a bundle of cloth diapers and little booties she'd sewn from scraps. The other was Eli, a wildland boy from the neighboring ranch, part Comanche, part firecracker. He was 13 and half horse from how he ran. He showed up one afternoon with a can full of prairie flowers and a lopsided grin. "They're for him," he said, pointing at Ash. "But I guess you can have them too." The girl blinked. Then nodded. Didn't say thank you, but took the flowers and set them on the windowsill. It was the first color the house had seen in a long time. Spring came slow. The snow melted in trickles. Chickens pecked further from the coop. And one day, when Everett returned from the fields and walked in dusty and tired, he found the girl laughing, real, wind in the throat laughing, as Ash tried to grab hold of her braid and she twirled it just out of reach. He stopped in the doorway, watching. Not interrupting. Just letting the sound wrap around him like a blanket he didn't know he missed. She caught his gaze and froze. The laughter stopped too quick. He just nodded once. "Glad to hear the wall's working again." "What walls?" she asked softly. "These ones," he said, tapping the wood with his boot. "They ain't much without a little life echoing in 'em." That night she tucked Ash into the cradle and sat by the fire, legs crossed under her. She looked at Everett, eyes full of a question she didn't know how to ask. He answered it anyway. "You're safe here. Ain't no one coming for you." She nodded slowly, then looked at the flames. She didn't say thank you? Not yet. Words like that came last, when hearts believed them. But when she fell asleep that night, she didn't wake with a start every hour. Outside, coyotes called to one another across the open land. Inside, the fire burned low, steady. The baby snored a little in his cradle. And the girl, though still small, took up space now. Like roots sinking quiet into soil that had finally allowed them. She hadn't asked for a home, but she was starting to shape one with every breath she allowed herself to take without fear. The storm came without warning. 1 hour, the sky was open and blue, light skimming across the hills like gold dust caught in wind. The next, clouds crowded over the ranch, heavy and low, as if the heavens were holding their breath. Thunder cracked like an old tree splitting in two, and rain began to pour, not polite, not soft, but hard, angry, as though it wanted to wash the world clean. Ash cried before the first drop fell. The girl, barefoot, dress hem damp from the porch, scooped him up before he could wail too loud. His cheeks flushed deep red, body hot as coals. She pressed her lips to his forehead, then the side of his neck, then the soft spot above his brow. Too hot. She moved quickly, holding him close, rocking him in that rhythm only he seemed to understand. But he didn't settle. He screamed harder. His fists beat the air, legs kicked, mouth open in a sound she'd never heard from him before. She tried not to panic, but it crept in anyway. Her voice shook as she whispered lullabies that once worked like charms. They slipped from her lips now like broken spells. Everett came in from the barn soaked to the bone, mud slicked across his boots, shirt clinging to him like second skin. He saw her by the fire, knees drawn up, the baby curled against her chest, and he knew something was wrong. He stepped closer, slow and cautious. "Fever?" She didn't look up. Just nodded, eyes locked on the baby's face. Her hands trembled as she held a damp rag against his forehead. He won't stop. I tried, he's burning up. What if he? Her voice cracked like dry wood. What if I lose him? Everett knelt beside her, gentle despite his sighs. Let me see. For a moment she hesitated. Then she placed the baby in his arms, reluctantly, like handing over her own breath. Everett cradled the child carefully, the way someone might hold a flickering flame in the wind. He checked the pulse, felt the heat, looked into the red-rimmed eyes that blinked back at him in misery. He didn't speak false comfort. Just nodded once, then looked to the girl. We'll need Mara. She moved instantly, gathering cloths, the milk tin, whatever she thought might help. Everett saddled a horse in the storm, vanished into the downpour, and left the girl alone with the fire, the cradle, and a baby that whimpered like something was slipping from him minute by minute. She wrapped herself around him again, skin to skin. Sang again. Pleaded this time. Told stories she didn't remember learning, about a river that could carry pain away, about a light that lived in babies' hearts and kept the sky turning. She said she was sorry. For not being older. For not knowing how to fix things. For not being enough. I can't do this again. She whispered into his hair. Please. Not him too. When Everett returned, he brought Mara in tow, wrapped in a black cloak, her arms already moving. She took Ash, examined him by firelight, checked his gums, his tongue, his breathing. He's fighting it, she said. We've got a chance. The girl sat on the floor, watching, arms folded around her legs. She'd gone quiet now. Not still, just pulled inward. Like all her ribs were pressing in on her lungs. Mara worked through the night, cooling him, soothing him, slipping him drops of clove and lavender, massaging his little body with oils that smelled of wild things. She whispered the old words, not English but something older, softer. The girl didn't ask what they meant. She just listened, as if the meaning might rise on its own. Everett sat beside her. He didn't touch her. Didn't speak even. Just stayed. Like a pillar, solid and steady beside her unraveling. At one point the girl spoke without turning her head. My mama died with fever in her belly. Couldn't carry the second baby. Said she'd name it Star. But it never came. Everett didn't move. My pa followed a week later. Heart gave out, they said. Or maybe he just didn't want to live without her. Her voice was quieter than the wind outside. I carried Ash out of that house wrapped in my mother's shawl. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I walked till my feet bled. Thought if I kept walking, maybe God would notice. Everett's reply came like an ember, small, glowing, hidden under ash. Sometimes he notices when we don't stop. She looked at him then. Really looked. And in that brief glance, something softened between them. The fire hissed. The wind moaned. But morning crept in anyway. By first light, Ash's breath slowed. Not in danger, but resting. His skin was no longer flushed, his limbs still but loose in sleep. Mara smiled. He'll be all right now. The worst is past. The girl exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She touched Ash's tiny foot, then his cheek, then let herself slump forward, head on her knees. Mara packed her things and nodded to Everett. She's strong. Stronger than she knows. She shouldn't have to be, he said quietly. Mara's eyes softened. None of us should. But when we are, it's something holy. Later, after Mara left and Ash had been tucked into the cradle again, the girl sat at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's dress, hair tangled, eyes hollowed from fear. Everett poured 2 cups of water and sat across from her. She didn't drink. Thank you, she said, voice raw. You kept him alive through the worst part, Everett said. You did that. I was scared, she whispered. So was I. The silence after felt like rain over dry ground. Not loud, but needed. He leaned back slightly. You remind me of my wife. She looked up, surprised. She lost a child too. Our only one. Just after birth. We named her Elsie. My wife didn't cry right away. Just rocked in a chair by the fire. Days on end. Then one day she looked at me and said, "We gave her everything we had. And that's all any parent can do." The girl blinked hard, as if forcing tears back through stubbornness. "I'm not his mama," she said. "You are," Everett said gently. "And you're doing better than most." She closed her eyes, folded her hands. It wasn't comfort, not quite. But it was something like release. That night, she stayed by Ash's cradle. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she let Everett drape a blanket over her shoulders. She didn't shrug it off. Outside, the wind quieted. The storm had passed. Inside, nothing had been repaired in the way buildings are. But something had shifted, the kind of shift that happens inside would soak through, dried by flame, then made stronger than it ever was before. What was broken still held water. And somewhere in that truth, the girl fell asleep, not afraid of tomorrow. Spring unfolded slowly across the plains, like a blanket shaken loose after a long winter. Green returned in slivers, first to the grass by the well, then to the hillside behind the barn, where wildflowers tiptoed back into bloom. Life resumed without ceremony. Quiet, gentle. Like it had never left, only waited. Ash took his first steps beneath the cottonwood tree that grew crooked beside the porch. His legs were wobbly, his arms flailed for balance, but when his bare feet touched the soil, he shrieked with a joy that sounded like sunlight. The girl, older now in spirit though only months had passed, knelt beside him with open hands and laughter that filled the empty spaces between breeze and birdsong. Everett watched from the porch, a mug of weak coffee in one hand, the other resting across his knee. He didn't smile with his mouth often, but something softened in his posture when he looked at them, like a man remembering he still had time left to be part of the living. By then, the girl had a routine. Morning chores before the sun crested the ridge, eggs collected, goats milked, floor swept. Then she'd sit by the hearth with Ash, telling him stories while sewing little patches onto his shirts. No one told her to. She simply chose to stay. Like roots that had found soil deep enough to hold them. She began reading, slowly but with hunger, from the books Everett kept stacked on an old shelf, weathered volumes his wife once cherished. At first, she stumbled through the words, moving her lips soundlessly. But then the words began to rise out of her like a stream finding its voice. Sometimes she read aloud to Ash. He'd giggle, babble back, reach up and tug her braid like a bookmark. One afternoon, Everett walked into the house and found the two of them asleep on the rug, a book still open across her chest and Ash curled like a cat against her side. He didn't wake them. Just sat at the table and listened to the wind move through the walls. The girl began writing her name in the dirt with a stick, practicing it. Testing its shape. As if it had always belonged to someone else, but now it might belong to her too. Still, not all things grew soft. One morning, Everett returned from town carrying a letter. The girl was fixing the latch on the chicken coop, sleeves rolled up, hair tied with a string of yarn. He handed it to her wordlessly. She read the name on the envelope, her step-uncle's scrawl. The world stilled around her. The letter was short. Legal. Blunt. Her uncle had heard of the baby's recovery. He knew there were mouths to feed and hands in need. He claimed guardianship by blood and right. Said he'd come soon to collect what belonged to him. She didn't say much after reading it. Just stood there a long time, holding the letter as if it were fire she was too stubborn to drop. Then she walked to the barn, shut the door behind her, and wasn't seen until dusk. Everett didn't chase her. But that evening he made soup. Her favorite. Left a bowl by her cot. When she emerged, eyes dry but distant, she ate every drop without speaking. Later, she stood on the porch and whispered to the horizon. He's not coming back. Not for Ash. Not for me. Everett joined her there, the lantern between them casting shadows across the floorboards. If he tries, he said slowly, he'll find there's more to raising a child than blood. She didn't ask what he meant. But she leaned closer to the lantern's glow that night, warming her hands like someone ready to stay through another season. The next few days she worked with new resolve. taught Ash how to say her name, gathered wildflowers with Eli and tied them into knots. She even began drawing pictures on scraps of paper, mostly trees and stars, but sometimes a house with smoke curling from its roof. Then, one Sunday, a stranger rode up the hill. Dust trailed behind the horse like a bad omen. The man dismounted with too much confidence, boots polished, eyes sharp. He was younger than Everett but walked like he wanted to own the land he stepped on. The girl froze when she saw him. It was the step-uncle. He didn't greet. Didn't look at Ash. Just scanned the place like a butcher eyeing livestock. Everett stepped outside, calm but unmoving. "You're not welcome here," he said. "I've got papers," the man replied, holding them up. "Right of kin. The boy's got a future if he comes with me. Money in the city. Education. Ain't no place for him here with goats and dirt." "He's already got a future," Everett said. "Right here," the man sneered. "You think the court'll choose an old rancher over a blood uncle?" The girl stepped forward, her voice stronger than it had ever sounded. "You left us. Sold me for $10. Left Ash to die. You don't get to come back just because it's convenient." The man opened his mouth, but Everett cut in. "We've got folks ready to speak for us. Judge knows the story. Knows who raised that child." There was no shouting. Just stillness. The kind that made even the wind pause. After a long silence, the man spat in the dirt and climbed back on his horse. As he rode away, Ash waved. Not in recognition. Just because he liked waving. The girl watched until the rider was nothing but a speck. Later, Everett stood in the doorway, hands braced against the frame. "You're not going anywhere," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she whispered. That night she carved 3 letters into the porch rail with her pocket knife, ********, and traced her finger across each one. Inside, Ash played with a wooden spoon. Everett sat beside the hearth, reading. The girl curled on the floor with a wool blanket and a sketch of a house in her lap. No one spoke. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like home. Summer came with a hush, the kind of golden warmth that draped itself across the land without asking. The grass grew long and soft, and the river sang a little louder each day. Even the wind seemed to know there was peace here now, and it moved gentler, careful not to stir too much. Ash had learned how to run, and run he did, through fields of dandelions, across the porch, into the arms of anyone who called his name. His laugh rang through the valley like chimes on a string, pulling smiles from even the weariest hearts. His legs were still too short to climb the fence, but he tried anyway, grinning all the while. The girl, his sister, though no one had to say it, followed after him, faster now, taller, sunburned and barefoot, and finally free. Everett had added a second room to the house. Said nothing about it, just built it one morning while the girl and Ash were picking berries down by the stream. When she returned, there it was, fresh pine walls, a window that faced east, and a little carved sign over the door with one word etched deep into the wood, "Home." She ran her fingers across the letters slowly, the way someone might trace a memory they didn't want to lose. The paperwork had taken time. But Everett, with his quiet determination, had done what needed doing. Mara helped, bringing names and letters from the town. Eli's father spoke up, so did the preacher, even the storekeep who never said much. One by one, voices added up. By the time they stood before the judge, everything that mattered had already been said. The courtroom was small, lined with wood and dust. Ash sat on Everett's lap, chewing on a button. The girl wore a plain blue dress and held a folded sheet of paper in both hands, the one she'd written her name on, over and over, just in case they asked her to. The judge looked tired but kind. He read through the documents, then looked up at her. "Why do you want this child under your care?" Her voice didn't shake. "Because I'm already raising him." "And Mr. Nash?" Everett nodded. "Because she belongs with him. And they both belong with me." The judge said little. Just signed his name, lifted the seal, and pressed it down with a soft thump. The sound echoed through the wood-paneled room like a gunshot, only gentler. It was done. On the way home, Ash fell asleep in her lap. She leaned her head on Everett's shoulder, the sun streaking across the wagon seat like ribbons of gold. They didn't speak of the past again. One morning not long after, Everett handed her a small parcel wrapped in cotton cloth. She opened it carefully. Inside was a silver brooch, shaped like a leaf, delicate and slightly bent. It had belonged to his wife, he said, the last thing she wore before they buried her under the cottonwood tree. She would have liked you, he said. You remind me of her. Not how you look. How you stay. She wore the brooch every Sunday after that, pinned at her collar. Not as decoration, but as a kind of promise. The town slowly stopped seeing her as the girl from the auction. People began nodding as she passed. Some waved. When Ash got sick again, just a cold this time, neighbors brought soup and wild honey. The sheriff, who had once stood silent at her sale, brought her a stack of old books for reading practice. She accepted each gift with a quiet nod, not prideful, but knowing now what dignity felt like. Even the porch had changed. It used to be a place she sat and watched the world go by, not knowing if she was part of it. Now it was where she taught Ash to draw stars with charcoal, wherever it carved names into the wood, hers, Ash's, and one other they didn't speak aloud, but honored every Sunday with flowers. Time passed in small ways. The seasons turned. Ash spoke in full sentences. The girl began sewing better, trading with town folks. Eli started visiting more often. And Everett, though still quiet, began humming when he worked. Not songs with words, just low notes that filled the air like a second heartbeat. One evening, after supper, they all sat outside beneath the cottonwood tree. The breeze carried the scent of wild mint, and fireflies danced like floating lanterns. Ash curled between them, his head in Everett's lap, his feet in hers. The girl tilted her head back, stared at the stars. You think my mama can see us? She asked softly. Everett nodded, eyes still on the boy asleep across his legs. I think she sees everything now. And I think she's proud. I still miss her, she said. Missing means she mattered, he answered. She reached down, brushing a curl from Ash's forehead. Sometimes I think I wasn't supposed to survive all that. That maybe I was meant to go with her. You survived, Everett said, because you were meant to carry something forward. Something better. She didn't respond, but she reached out and rested her hand atop his. His fingers wrapped around hers without hesitation. The quiet swelled again, not empty, not hollow. Full. Sacred. Like all the words they didn't need were resting inside it, understood without ever being spoken. Ash stirred in his sleep, mumbling something that sounded like home. They both smiled. In time, people would forget how she arrived. The girl holding a baby, sold like cattle to the highest voice. That day would fade like fog over the river. What would remain was what she built with her hands and her heart. A house that rang with laughter. A boy who grew up knowing he was wanted. A man who learned that silence could heal as much as it once hurt. And her. Not a burden. Not a pity. But a name carved into the porch rail. A song sung in quiet rooms. A root so deep no storm could unearth it. Some stories begin with fire and fury. Others with a whisper. This one began with neither. Just a hand held out in the dust, and another choosing to take it. And that, dear reader, was enough.